Imagine the person you trust most in the whole world deliberately trying to make you feel like you're losing your mind. Well, according to a survey by the National Domestic Violence Hotline, a staggering 73.8% of victims reported that their partner did exactly that. Yeah, almost three-quarters. And nearly 86% said their partner had outright called them crazy or accused them of being crazy. This isn't just a bad argument, folks. It's a systematic dismantling of someone's sanity.
So this brings us to a really tough question. How do you prove a crime that leaves absolutely no physical mark? When the weapons of choice are denial, contradiction, and misinformation, how on earth do you investigate and prove a pattern of invisible psychological abuse?
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the anatomy of an invisible crime, gaslighting and coercive control. Let's get right into it.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the psychology of gaslighting.
Now, gaslighting is a term we hear thrown around a lot online these days, but it's way more than just a trendy buzzword. It's a highly destructive manipulation tactic where the abuser actively makes their target question their own reality, their memories, and even their basic perceptions. Based on research highlighted by deception expert Pamela Meyer, there's actually a distinct four-step progression to how this abuse unfolds. Step 1 is love bombing. It's exactly what it sounds like. Excessively intense affection, exaggerated compliments, lavish gifts right at the start. It basically masks the future abuse and makes the victim feel this overwhelming obligation to stay. Then the trap starts to close with Step 2, survivor isolation. Gaslighters will start making disparaging comments about the victim's friends and family, slowly undermining those trusted relationships until the victim is completely dependent on the abuser. Step 3 introduces perpetrator unpredictability. This is where the abuser swings wildly from being incredibly loving to completely cold and distant without any warning whatsoever. One study participant actually described their partner popping in and out of their life, just expecting them to serve their needs. And finally, we hit Step 4, cold shouldering. The perpetrator completely withdraws all emotion and communication as a form of punishment, forcing the totally confused victim to become unnecessarily apologetic just to restore some peace in the house.
So how does the law actually handle this psychological nightmare? That brings us to Section 2, defining coercive control and the legal framework.
For a really long time, the legal system had a massive blind spot here. But back in December 2015, the UK Home Office issued a statutory guidance framework. The goal was to help police and criminal justice agencies investigate a brand new offense, finally recognizing coercive control as a purposeful, repeated pattern of behavior taking place over time to exert power.
The guidance actually breaks this down into two distinct parts. First up is controlling behavior. What does that mean? Basically, it's a range of acts designed to make a person entirely subordinate and dependent. And they do this by isolating them from support, exploiting their resources for personal gain, cutting off their means of independence, and strictly regulating their everyday behavior. The absolute primary goal here is creating total dependency. We can contrast that with coercive behavior. This is defined as a continuing act or pattern of acts of assault, threats, humiliation, and intimidation. Think of it this way. If controlling behavior is about setting the degrading rules of the relationship, coercive behavior is how the abuser violently enforces those rules. It focuses heavily on punishment, threats, and fear to maintain a grip on the victim.
To really hit home just how critical this legal shift is, the Home Office guidance actually includes a powerful quote from expert Evan Stark's 2007 book. He wrote, "Not only is coercive control the most common context in which women are abused, it is also the most dangerous." This really grounds our explainer today. We aren't just talking about a toxic relationship dynamic, we are talking about extreme danger and a continuous violation of trust that can actually be far more harmful than a single incident of physical violence.
Moving right along to Section 3, tactics of the abuser.
Here's the tricky part to remember. A lot of these individual everyday acts might not actually constitute a criminal offense on their own, right? But string them together, and the repeated pattern severely limits the victim's space for action. It creates a terrifying story of ownership and entitlement. The sheer variety of these tactics is frankly staggering. It includes monitoring a person through spyware, financial abuse like strictly controlling the bank accounts or handing out a punitive allowance. It even gets as granular as controlling what the victim can wear, who they're allowed to see, and exactly when they can sleep. It's the absolute micromanagement of a human life, often backed up by threats to hurt their children or publish private sensitive information.
And these perpetrators, they are incredibly adept at gaming professional systems to cover their tracks. Offender tactics to frustrate investigations usually start with targeting vulnerable people right from the beginning. They may use the system against the victim by making false or vexatious counter-allegations. They exploit circumstances, for instance, threatening to inform immigration if the victim doesn't have a right to remain, or threatening to call social services and have their kids taken away. They actively try to draw the police into colluding with their control.
Which naturally leads us to Section 4, the manipulator's mindset. What specific personality traits actually drive someone to systematically gaslight and isolate a partner?
Well, a fascinating 2023 psychological study explored the dark tetrad of personality traits to find out, and the breakdown here is super interesting. You might immediately assume narcissism is the main culprit, but it actually has the weakest ties to gaslighting overall. Instead, sadism has the absolute strongest ties, and primary psychopathy, which is defined by extreme callousness and profound emotional detachment, is highly connected. Secondary psychopathy, which tends to be more highly emotional and impulsive, has a much weaker connection. So it's really the cold, detached, and sadistic traits that truly fuel this specific kind of abuse.
The research and legal data also point out a clear gender disparity. According to the Home Office guidance, statistics from 2014 to 2015 show that 92.4% of defendants in domestic abuse flagged cases were male. Alongside that, the 2023 study found that men actually found gaslighting tactics more acceptable in relationships than women did. This was especially true for men who exhibited vulnerable narcissism, which is a trait marked by deep feelings of inadequacy and a major hypersensitivity to rejection.
So, how do investigators actually fight back and build a case? Let's transition to Section 5, Proving the Invisible Crime.
The law draws a super clear line in the sand here. An isolated incident, like a one-off argument or a solitary mean action, doesn't meet the threshold. The law requires proving a repeated or continuous pattern, and crucially, this pattern must have a serious effect on the victim. That means it either causes the victim to fear violence will be used against them on at least 2 occasions, or it causes serious alarm and distress that has a substantial, documented adverse effect on their usual day-to-day activities.
And how do you prove that substantial effect? By following the trail of evidence. Think of this as dusting for digital and behavioral fingerprints. Police utilize bank records to show rigid financial control. They pull vast logs of emails, text messages, and social media data. They look at medical records, 999 transcripts, and logs from support services. They gather witness testimony from friends and family about the victim being deliberately isolated. They even rely on personal diaries kept by the victim to establish the exact timeline of the control.
I really want to emphasize a massively important point here. It is the job of the police to build this case from these records, not the victim's burden to build it for them. The evidence of this invisible crime is often already there, hiding in plain sight within the victim's digital footprint and their forced lifestyle changes.
And when they do put the pieces together, the consequences are severe. Under the Serious Crime Act 2015, the maximum penalty for engaging in controlling or coercive behavior is up to 5 years imprisonment, an unlimited fine, or both. The law has finally caught up to the psychology of manipulation.
Which leaves us with one final, really important question. If the signs of gaslighting and coercive control are hiding in plain sight, masked as excessive early affection, or buried in degrading daily rules, how will you protect your own reality? As expert Pamela Meyer suggests, deception detection training and recognizing these patterns early is the very first step. Because once you understand the anatomy of this invisible crime, you are far less vulnerable to its control. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and stay focused out there.